Welcome to today's talk, and thank you to Interface for sponsoring this series for IIDA. And welcome to 4 sustainable design professionals from around the country who are joining me today. Our discussion will focus on sustainability. We'll look at the big picture and then narrow our focus to a few key areas. What is the impact of the current crisis on the future of design for sustainability, health, and wellness? How are approaches to sustainability and design evolving based on this critical moment for a more resilient future, considering culture, place, materials, energy, climate, and carbon? We're going to try to touch on all of that in just an hour. If you're designing any commercial interior, this talk is for you. Our speakers are all focused on this area and are all here to offer lessons that can be applicable to the design of any project. This session is approved for 1 CEU from IDCEC for interior designers. Further information is about that is on the screen right now. If you need that credit, send an email to ceu@iida.org. If you did not already input your member number when you registered. Take a screenshot of this screen if you'd like to do that. And I'd like to introduce our panelists. I want to make sure that our audience knows who we have here today. We're really thrilled to have all 4 of them. So first is Sonja Bochart, IIDA. Sonja, just say hi. Sonja's right there. Sonja is principal at Shepley Bulfinch in Phoenix. Sonja has more than 20 years of experience as a health and wellness-focused project designer and biophilic design consultant. Her portfolio includes higher education, healthcare, cultural, and corporate design. Also with us is Blaine Brownell. Blaine, wave so we know who you are. There's Blaine. Blaine is an architect, professor, and he's the interim architecture department head at the University of Minnesota. He also writes regularly for Architect magazine, and he was the author of the book series Transmaterial, which was published by Princeton Architectural Press. And beginning July 1st, Blaine will be the director of the School of Architecture at UNC Charlotte. So thanks, Blaine, for joining us, given the transition and move that you're about to undertake. Also with us is Mikhail Davis. Mikhail, wave for us. Mikhail is Director Technical Sustainability Americas for Interface. He's based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he's responsible for advancing Interface's continued journey in sustainability in the Americas. And also joining us is Paula McEvoy. Paula, wave, so we know who you are. Paula is an architect and associate principal at Perkins & Will in Atlanta. She is one of 5 colleagues who lead Perkins & Will's Living Design Leadership Council. Paula is responsible for coordinating the sustainable design efforts across the firm's offices with those colleagues. And she served as the 2016 chair of AIA's Committee on the Environment Advisory Group. Paula was also the project architect for Interface's Basecamp Atlanta headquarters that opened in October 2018. So welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us, and let's jump into it. As a preface for our audience, generally we're going to focus more on the future, taking lessons from this moment, but we'll consider the impact, say, 3 or more years from now in a hopefully post-COVID future. So for our panelists, I want all of you to share your big picture thoughts on the impact that this moment has on sustainable design and wellness as we know it. Where do we go from here? Sonja, I'll start with you because this week you posted about this session on LinkedIn, and you wrote something great. And this is quoting you, quote, "Can we consider these current times as a way to awaken us more deeply to the importance of designing with care and compassion for people and the planet?" So Sonja, tell us what you were thinking as you chose to phrase that message the way that you did.
All right, well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. and I thank you all for joining the call. I hope you're safe and doing well. My response to that question, as far as kind of where we're going and my own viewpoint, is deeply personal. So I'll just kind of take that nod and start there. Every day I kind of root myself on where we're at. And last time I checked, it's 2020. We're in the middle of this global pandemic and the world has all but slowed down. And yet when I look around me, it seems like so much of us are still trying to hurry to just figure everything out and to have the solutions. And we also have that tendency to want to do it first. So for myself, I think that as a designer, one of the best things we can do right now is actually honor the moment that we're in and take a deep breath. And like right now, I mean, take a deep breath together. I think this path forward, we need to have more courage to embrace the slowing down, because it's really our opportunity to question everything. And it's our opportunity to maybe look at what we've created and question our values and question what we've created, maybe what we want to re-envision. How do we create more wholeness for not only our own human species, but the planet? So this is really about essence work, and it's deep and it's meaningful, and now's the time for us to reflect and to come out on the other side. I think to get to that place of really regenerative design, no matter what scale we're working on, we need to have that personal conviction. I would say that we have all the technology and the innovation and the tools that we need to create these environments, these spaces, these materials. What we lack is the will. So I think we need to kind of move out of our heads a little bit and into our hearts, and I think now's the time. To me, that translates into my own work, into frameworks. So, for example, I'm starting to think about different ways of working, and I'm constantly trying to evolve, and my partners are also evolving in this process. So, you know, taking, for instance, people as the center of a project, I'd like to start to reconsider the project as the center, and then maybe these almost as if it's like a triangle around the project. And we have for me, it's a deep-seated consideration for carbon reduction, like a focus on that. My reflection is all on carbon right now. It's on nature, and it's not only on protecting what we have, it's additional restoration. And maybe the third part of that triangle is the human aspect. And that human aspect is about health and well-being, and it's about mind, body, and spirit. So this is really a different way of looking at our interconnections. And it's a challenge for us to find more balance in our work.
Right. Mikhail, when we had chatted previously, so first of all, I had chatted with each of you separately before this talk. Mikhail, you had mentioned it's a moment to question business as usual. Is that, how do you see this moment impacting the future of sustainability?
Yeah, so we at the Interface, we've always had a big picture view of sustainability. The thing I always liked about the way Ray Anderson, our founder, framed sustainability is it was based on systems. I learned systems thinking as an environmental scientist. He learned systems thinking as an industrial engineer at Georgia Tech. He wanted to bring those two kinds of systems thinking together. And when you look at it as a systems challenge, it's big and complex and bigger than any one of us can solve. The trouble is that the systems develop their own momentum, and we've had momentum in a certain direction, including a momentum toward a system that inherently is destabilizing the climate. We have just interrupted that system. That's actually a good thing, but not if we just restart the exact same system. We get back to normal. This is a time to question how much we really liked normal and exactly the way all of our systems were working before we had this enforced slowdown and disruption of business as usual.
Mm-hmm. A good point. Questioning how we liked normal is a good point that I just wrote down. Blaine, what are your thoughts on the impact of this moment on the future of sustainability and sustainable design?
Well, I just wanted to build on those great points with a specific insight. There's an article in Green Tech Media entitled "Why Empty Office Buildings Still Consume Lots of Power During the Pandemic," something like that. And many of you have probably seen that. I think that's definitely a wake-up call, that alone. The fact that we've designed systems to run continuously and to require continuous power, water, air movement. And these systems are not resilient to these kinds of changing needs. There are other systems, but they're not the typical ones that we would install in buildings. Also, plug loads are out of control, right? So the fact that we're not occupying a significant portion of the built environment right now, and yet it's still demanding a tremendous amount of power, suggests a massive failure design-wise on our part, as opposed to what we're trumpeting as a success, that we're not using as much power.
You mentioned another article, but Blaine, you wrote an article on this topic that was in Architect magazine recently. What is the percentage of office buildings right now largely are unoccupied, but how much energy is being used?
Well, the sources that I looked at said that they're using still anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of the energy that they would while occupied, simply to continue running these systems.
Amazing. Paula, in the big picture, your thoughts on the impact that this moment has related to sustainability. I'm sure that you and your colleagues, especially leading sustainability firm-wide across Perkins and Will, are having discussions about this regularly.
We have been all through this. And again, thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and happy everybody can join this. We have been looking at ourselves and then looking at our clients and our colleagues and trying to figure out what the best way is. And I think something interesting is I'm in Georgia, which was, one of the fast back to work states or back to restaurant states. And we're seeing a lot of people going really fast to try to get back in spaces. We're seeing a lot of manufacturers maybe trying to sell them things that they say will help them do that better. And then we're also seeing things like, well, just come in every other day or sit in every other seat. We're also having people saying, that's a pretty scary look. When I go into my office and, only 1/3 of the people are there, or half of the people are there, what is that going to make people feel like? Are they going to be scared about the missing other half? And we don't want to create that kind of environment. So for us, rather than overreacting and trying to find the solution for right this minute, we're trying to think of how this is going to work in the long term. We know people might not be coming back to offices, which is a really scary thing when you're an architect designing offices. And I think one of the other things that we've been finding, this is our 9th week of working remotely. We've kept projects moving ahead. People are teaming, using the tools, collaborating. But the thing that I think that we really miss the most is that creative energy that comes when we're all together in one room and shredding and, energy and creativity is flying. And I don't think we know what that's going to look like immediately. When we go back, if we're sitting 6 feet apart, what does that conversation look like? So we're trying to look for ways where we can be collaborative and creative and have the energy of being together in person in 2 or 3 years and doing it safely.
It's interesting you point out the office, the workplace. We might touch on that a little more a little later. You had pointed out that it's even a question on the return to the office and how fully we might do that. Just this week, Twitter announced that employees don't have to return to the office. That's a really amazing time of rethinking, as Mikhail said, business as usual across every aspect. For focusing back in on sustainability, and let's talk about materials. Blaine, you've had a focus on materials as the author of the transmaterial book series. And designers, many of whom are watching us right now, they've become more savvy about what is in materials and the sustainable properties of materials. So again, with a lens toward the impact of this moment, but looking toward the future, what further advances in your mind would you like to see related to material choices in interiors?
Yeah, absolutely. Stating the obvious, I think reducing VOCs and harmful off-gassing will, I think, become an increased priority for everyone, especially as we reoccupy spaces that have been sitting vacant. And I should mention that one of the side effects or related effects of having VOC emitting materials in our workplaces is that HVAC systems are designed to run continuously when not occupied to help clean the air and maintain quality in terms of the environment. And so I think that alone is something that we'll look at, I hope, we'll scrutinize in depth, is why do we have these materials that are polluting our interior environment? And the pandemic has simply raised awareness, obviously, with regard to health, human health in particular, and interior spaces much more. So I think all materials, it's really fascinating. There are articles called things like fear of surfaces, you know, and we're realizing, oh, we spend hours out of the day touching desks and countertops and, you know, door handles and guardrails, et cetera. And there isn't, I'm fascinated with the fact that in many cases, there are obvious sustainability tie-ins, right? That if we have reduced VOCs, as I mentioned, that has multiple benefits in terms of sustainability, you know, planetary health, human health. But in terms of this antimicrobial side to materials, it's really fascinating because I think that what we're finding is not always closely aligned. I mean, we can't, I presume we can't have all interior surfaces clad in copper, for example. That would not be a sustainable choice. But I think it's interesting. I think the design industries are studying very quickly the science and trying to get up to speed really quickly in terms of aligning our sustainable knowledge with questions of microbial interaction and surfaces.
And I think that's part of what John said. There is a overriding challenge not to overreact to this specific crisis and make decisions that we will regret later. That includes using chemicals we shouldn't use, you know, using resources we shouldn't use, like cladding everything in copper, which is, frankly, there's only preliminary data that shows that that really helps that much. And it's an increasingly scarce resource that, by the way, we need for every IT project everywhere, let alone the environmental impact of copper mining. So, you know, let's try to think in terms of stuff like VOC, stuff we wanted to do anyway. Can we use this disruption as a way to double down on design ideas we already knew were good, designing for resilience and adaptability and modularity, designing for indoor air quality? These are all things we wanted to do anyway, but they make even more sense during the current crisis.
Yeah. Blaine already brought up antimicrobials, and we want to touch on that. So let's be sure we talk about that. Paula, let's also assume that not everyone has the same level of understanding. And I know that when you and I talked, I learned about this in just our one-on-one conversation. So if you could explain what antimicrobials are briefly and why they're not necessarily a good thing in interiors.
Yeah, antimicrobials, as it sounds, are things that are meant to kill microbes and illness-causing things, bacterias, germs, all of that stuff. And there's two different kinds. So when we say antimicrobial, there's a couple of different things. One is if you're a manufacturer and you're manufacturing something that's plasticized, there are antimicrobials that you can add to that mix so that the plastic doesn't become brittle and break, and it improves the lifespan of the product. And those are inherently part of the product and they're fine. But according to the CDC and the FDA, the other ones that you probably remember are the soap that used to have antimicrobials in it, or antimicrobial coatings on furniture or on chairs or any of that. These things are applied by manufacturers or end users, and there's no proof over 40 years of research from the FDA and the CDC that these have any sort of protective elements or benefits. The CDC says washing your hands with plain soap is just as effective as washing your hands with antimicrobial soap. So as one of the reactions that we're seeing, manufacturers are now advertising, we've got these antimicrobial desk surfaces or utensils or doorknobs or anything. And I think that's one of the things that we've been saying about don't take the obvious misstep that you will regret later, because these things are not permanently fixed to the materials to which they're applied. They can come out, they can come off, they can leach into the air, they can leach into the water, they can end up in you. They have very serious health benefits for people, especially for children. They increase allergies. And one of the scary things that they do is start learning to be resistant to the antimicrobials. So these microbes that you're trying to treat aren't stupid, and they're not going to let you just kill them out because you want to. They're going to change, and they're going to go resistant. And this is what you've heard about the super bugs and the super resistant strains of bacteria. So think about the use for them. Think about the alternatives. Look at the research and the science. CDC has a lot of articles about it. And actually, in 2017, we added antimicrobials that were not meant to be a part of, that had health claims, not inherently part of the material, but antimicrobials with advertising health claims we added to the precautionary list. So we've been trying to avoid them for a while.
Okay. And just to be sure, you had mentioned health benefits, but I think you actually meant health detriments.
The claim is that, if you use this soap, it'll have a benefit to your health because it'll kill all the germs. So false advertising beneficial claims of antimicrobials.
Mm-hmm. Sonja, related to materials and working with your clients, you had told me that different clients are willing to go to different levels. Some clients want to be red list compliant, as you said, and some, and you're willing to work with them if that's what they're wanting and willing to do. For those in the audience that may not know what red list compliant is, quickly describe that, but also talk about how you have that conversation with your clients about essentially how far they are willing to go.
Sure. Well, the red list is different from different sources, but it's the main chemicals of concern that are proven and identified to have these health issues or these negative consequences of exposure. So we do have clients that we are able to partner with to ensure that we are not specifying those materials anywhere on their project. And then we have other clients that we're just kind of bringing along. I think what we try to do primarily is just honor where people are at. And if we're having that conversation and elevating the way they're practicing, and we're doing our work, we're doing the work we need to do. It's not a matter of intense judgment, because we are learning, we're all in this together. But I definitely love looking at those projects and those clients. They're at the kind of the top of the arc, that are showing it can be done, because it can. And I think as designers, we have a responsibility to, as we're talking about beauty, and we all know that beauty is so relevant in our projects, it really is important, but I think part of every conversation around beauty needs to be a conversation around the health of the materials. I mean, it's a personal frustration, or I guess a passion of mine, to say, I don't think an environment or a space is truly beautiful unless it is a healthy material. So I think we all need to advocate more for that.
Definitely. Paula, you already mentioned the Perkins and Will precautionary list. I want to ask you more about that. You've been an advocate for transparency in building product ingredients. Explain the importance of transparency and material health to your work and to Perkins and Will. The precautionary list is more than 10 years old now. So how has it evolved? And how do you work with it with your clients?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story. In 2007, my colleague Robin Gunther was working on a cancer treatment center, and they asked her very simply to don't use materials that could cause cancer. And we were all kind of dumbfounded because we didn't know which materials cause cancer and which ones didn't cause cancer. So we tried to find out, and through a process of going to manufacturers and talking with sales reps, it became clear that that wasn't information that was easily available. Either they thought it was intellectual property or trade secret, or some cases they didn't know, some cases they used commodity elements that went into their materials. So we really started pushing to be more transparent. A couple of years during that process, we had developed an Excel spreadsheet of what we identified as the 25 most prolific building materials, or the ones that contained most toxic materials, the most hazardous. And we said, this is a great list. We should do all of our projects should follow this. But then we said, you know, if we want manufacturers to change and tell us what's in it, Perkins and Will by ourselves is not going to be able to do that. So we need to get HOK and Gensler and HKS and Canon and everybody else who's working with materials and bring them on board, and let's go after this as a united team. So we developed a website called transparency.perkinswill.com, listed all the materials on it, the reasons, the science, the research, why they were on there. And it's called precautionary list because we're not banning these materials. We just want to find safer alternatives if there are, and just have discussions with manufacturers. I mean, Ray C. Anderson, we met with Ray in 2008, right after we had started these discussions, and met with the chemists and the scientists at Interface to try to figure out where the market was going and what the options were. And we've continued to do that. We had a major overhaul in 2017, which is where we updated it. We sunset some elements, we added more elements. That's when antimicrobials made their way onto the precautionary list. So for us, projects use the precautionary list as a guidance. There's no thing that says you absolutely have to avoid all of these substances, because we know that's not possible to do at this time. But it just helps broaden the conversations, include more healthy materials, and hopefully help manufacturers know what we want.
So it's an evolving, living list, a living document.
Absolutely.
As you've been having conversations about this moment, is there a need for major change soon related to anything that's in that list? Or is it pretty solid in terms of addressing this moment in time?
The thing about the list is we tie it to whatever usually federal or university research is out there. So it's not something where we can suspect something is bad or there's a new product on the market that hasn't been vetted. It's something where we've got the science behind it. We know what the health impacts are, and it's not Perkins and Will doing the research. It's the CDC doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we don't see anything, but we certainly have a watch list of materials that could be emerging. And
right.
That's part of what keeps it more relevant.
And that's updated on, there's a website specifically for that list, right?
Yeah, it's transparency.perkinswill.com. It's free, open to everybody.
Great. So Mikhail, we just spent a couple minutes talking about green chemistry. And as you and I talked, you mentioned that is one of 3 legs that are important together. I want you to talk about that, the 3 legs being green chemistry being 1, circular economy being 2, and embodied carbon being the 3rd. Tell us more about the importance of those 3 together.
Great, thanks, John. I think this has been a really interesting conversation, and I like the approach taken with the precautionary list of it really being, these are the materials we ask questions about. Now, I think, frankly, we could ask questions about all the materials, because the more you know, the more you see problems with all of the materials typically, because the system is broken. The system does not automatically spit out healthy and sustainable materials. By default, it does not take those into consideration. And if they're healthy or more sustainable, it's usually an accident because the system is not set up to consider those things. You know, we've had some movement in recent years to develop some better alternatives in terms of the materials palette, but typically they all have some kind of trade-off. So we wanted to really develop a framework that was a bit more holistic to capture those trade-offs. There aren't any silver bullet perfect materials. Just because they don't have red list ingredients doesn't mean that they're, you know, healthy in all scenarios or that they are part of a healthy system. But if you had a material that was made from entirely green chemistry, you know, the first lens we look at it through, so you're looking for non-toxicity, not just in the materials that end up in the product, but in terms of the life cycle. What chemicals are required to even build the component or the plastic? Turns out that most plastics are made from some type of poison gas. It's just a matter of which one. And you apply a huge amount of energy to it and turn it into this really stable thing that's not usually toxic anymore, but the monomers, the building blocks, typically are. So can we get that chemistry green, not just, you know, the additives that we then added to that plastic that ended up in the final product? That's important, obviously, but it's a piece of the green chemistry puzzle. But then if we get all of these materials to be wonderfully non-toxic and still throw them all in a landfill or an incinerator, and then, by the way, have to go back to the petrochemical and manufacturers, the mining companies, and say, yeah, we need some more because we threw the last stuff in the landfill, they're going to continue to perpetuate those unhealthy processes that they use to create those raw materials that they had to drag out of the earth somewhere. So that's not really a healthy system either. Similarly, if we have a product that, you know, is pretty recyclable, maybe it at least could be recycled. Maybe we've reduced the toxicity of the chemistry, but it's driving climate change, which if you ask the CDC, you know, they're a little busy right now, but they would say the #1 threat to public health in the 21st century, and you know, WHO and the Lancet and Harvard School of Public Health all say the same thing. You can Google it. #1 threat to public health in the 21st century is climate change. So if we have a 100% non-toxic recyclable material that has a high, you know, embodied carbon or embodied carbon emissions, that's basically all the emissions that went into the atmosphere to create that product, you know, from soup to nuts, all the way through the whole process of making it, that's also not a healthy product. So knowing that none of our materials are completely perfect in all aspects today, we have to just create visibility, transparency about what are the trade-offs. You say, wow, this product does something nothing else can do. It's got this ingredient I'm concerned about, but I can live with it. It can't be recycled, okay. You at least know where the gaps are. Because that's really what the challenge is. It's not just, and this is what I have discussion with my friends who work for different certifiers, is that unfortunately the certification check the box mindsets tells manufacturers, good enough, you can stop innovating. That's not, given how broken the system is, given how rare it is to find a truly healthy and sustainable material, that's not the message we need to be sending. We need to be sending the message of not just check the box, red list free, but healthy materials is a big challenge. How are you doing on each aspect of it? Let's be transparent. Let's acknowledge we're not going to have anything that's perfect right now, but let's continue to move forward in all of these areas.
And a big part of the equation is waste and recycling. And we talked about that a little bit one-on-one when we've had our phone conversations. Blaine, you had mentioned waste as a concern, that let's say there's a number of spaces being redesigned or reconsidered. Is there potentially a big surge in waste materials from interiors, interior architecture? That alone, you mentioned, would attract some attention and can be scrutinized. And it's the question of what are we recycling, and the recycling streams to be scrutinized. What are your further thoughts related to the waste issue related to the materials in interior environments?
Thanks, John. Yeah, now is a really interesting time in terms of material flow analysis, because it's a little bit like a hiccup or an interruption in some ways to our typical material churn. And as we know, that churn isn't always a healthy churn, especially with programs that use a lot of materials, go through materials quickly, dispose of them quickly. It's an interesting time. There's recently in Minneapolis, where I live, one of the kind of charitable donation places reopened, and there were cars 3 blocks long trying to deposit goods. And I think we could anticipate something similar with our non-residential spaces once we begin to reoccupy them. Certainly both current projects that had anticipated some churn, but also I think as we reanalyze what the materials are doing in our spaces, and we have to make those spaces more flexible. We have to remove partitions, we have to remove furniture, maybe carpeting, I don't know, certain finishes. I think that we could probably anticipate large piles of stuff visibly, moving through the system, and that process may awaken us to more awareness about just why are we throwing all this stuff away, or even why do we need to recycle so much stuff?
Interesting point.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of interesting points around that. I mean, this is fundamental to our analysis of what it would take to actually have sustainability. It's why we put circular economy right in there. If we want to talk about health and materials, we can't leave out circular economy. And the thing we need to come to grips with, and when we start to put together analysis of this, is that there is really a lack of great actual circular economic systems. Actually, although I will say the ones that work, we don't notice. When copper gets stolen off the outside of your building, that's because there's a great circular economy for copper. That means it's working. There is a readily available local market to recycle that.
And Mikhail, just to be sure the audience knows, by circular economy, you're referring to, say, for new products, not necessarily being made of all new materials, of reusing materials in many ways, right?
I'm just saying for the average interior product you pull out, there are very few at scale viable circular economic systems. We do a decent job of it, and we probably get back in a year, good year, 8% of what we sell. That goes back for recycling. We sold this number of pounds, we recycled this number of pounds, about 8% in a good year right now, but no one's even publishing those metrics. So we don't really know. And the reality is that and it is always a matter of local connections. Does someone locally know that there is a place to recycle that? We frankly have not gotten great traction on carpet recycling until we helped pass legislation in California that mandated improvements in carpet recycling, that actually created a tax on new carpet that went to subsidize carpet recycling, which is the only reason any of them are still in business. It's very difficult, business to recycle plastic during a low natural gas, low oil price environment, because you're competing against virgin petrochemicals from those feedstocks from natural gas and oil. So finding someone who wants instead to make their product from old carpet plastic is challenging, because just go get it from natural gas, that's pretty cheap. So this is something we have to, if we want to emerge from this and build a low carbon economy and build a healthier, less wasteful world, we're gonna have to really figure out how to start measuring this to bring some of the transparency we've started to bring to embodied carbon and ingredients to claims around circular economy. When someone says, oh, it's 100% recyclable, or we have a take-back program, I've got another list of questions for you to ask to make sure that, is that real? Because I can tell you, even ours, and we were very transparent in this in our 25th anniversary report that came out last year, that did not go as well as we had hoped 25 years ago when we set out to become this circular company. But it solves so many problems. If we stop having to make new materials from petrochemicals, huge reduction in toxicity, huge reduction in carbon footprint. It solves so many problems that it is worth digging into the complexity that is a circular economy.
And to the point of circular economy and waste and recycling, and Blaine alluded to it already, that right now we're hearing about a lot of solutions that are temporary solutions to potentially come back to the workplace that are mostly added panels, added acrylic panels. A lot of that, again, to Blaine's point, is it's at some point it's creating waste, and so there's a need to more fully question the full cycle of all of that. Absolutely.
The other thing I want to quickly add to the waste discussion, and this is its own discussion, is we have to, quite frankly, prepare for the fact that we are going to be in an economic recession. We are already in some sort of never before seen economic moment. Waste is lost money. Waste is lost profitability at a time when we can least afford it. So again, all of these things we were doing to reduce waste, whether it's on a job site or in a manufacturing plant, upstream in the supply chain, in terms of how we renovate offices, we have to really rethink all of that. And we could end up with systems that are fundamentally better for the environment, less wasteful, and cheaper if we do it right. We've had some interesting discussions with people, this was even before this moment, about a circular office. When you have someone who turns over offices every 3 to 5 years and replaces all the interiors, incredibly wasteful, huge environmental impact. What if we could create a retrofittable office? You know, we model up, hey, replace the sections of the carpet that are worn, replace the accent stripe with the new client's colors, but keep 80% of it. It's designed to last 15 years, not 3 to 5.
Right.
And by the way, savings and cost, huge, probably 80%. I mean, you have a little bit of installation cost to reconfigure it. But these are the things we really need to dig into. How can we reduce costs during a down economy in ways that also benefit sustainability?
That's great. I want to pivot a little bit toward what the designers are doing in terms of information and tools. A question for Sonja. You had told me that internally within the firm Shepley Bulfinch, you have a toolkit called Healthy People, Healthy Planet. And you've had it for a couple of years, and it's a document that engages your conversations with clients. Describe that for our audience that might be interested in how that can be an example for something that they might do in their firms.
Sure. So we've been practicing as a firm for over 140 years. And during that time, obviously, we've had clients with desires to pursue certifications and clients that don't. And so many times early on in the conversation, we found ourselves, if they didn't really have that want or that need to have a certification or pursue a certification, it just seems like so much was lost. And we kept finding ourselves at a place where we wanted to have those conversations. We weren't satisfied. We wanted to make sure we're helping and supporting our clients in evolving. So I would say this is authored by at least 30% of the firm has touched this toolkit, and it has been developed based on all the major certification programs. And it's more of a way for us to come into a conversation, actually come into a proposal, even prior to getting the project, come into an interview, and then come into a project workshop at the onset of the project in a way that we can talk about all of these things that matter. We have it broken down into 4 major elements and 12 major attributes. And it's around air, and it's around energy, and it's around water, and it's around carbon, and it's around comfort. It's all of these things that really matter, but it's a way that we can have a human conversation about that specific client. And so much of that is recognizing that clients are unique, and each project in place has a specific essence. It's our role to get in there and to have the conversation. And in a way that it's not complicated, it's very accessible, and And woven within that, we're talking about things like diversity and equity and inclusiveness. I mean, we should be thinking as wholes when we're, like a whole system when we're coming in here and creating solutions for our clients. And we found that it's working well. We find that our teams are becoming more knowledgeable and more educated internally, that we are connecting more with our engineers and our consultants. And the other value about having these tools to have these early conversations is that everyone becomes more purposeful with their work. They become more invested. I mean, when we introduce concepts like biophilia, human nature connection from day one, then we can really unpack the value and we can look at those strategies in a meaningful way where they're not just the surface approach. So it's well beyond a checklist mentality.
Good. Sounds like it's useful for you in your conversations with designers and something that other firms could consider developing to assist in their conversations as well. That's good. So you already mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I want to touch on that point a little further and ask Paula about that. So Paula's with Perkins & Will. Many of you watching know that IIDA's 2018-2019 international president was Gabrielle Bullock, who's a colleague of Paula's at Perkins & Will. Gabrielle is the director of global diversity firm-wide for the firm Perkins & Will. And Paula, when you and I had talked separately, you had described to me that issues of inclusion, social justice, diversity, and equity are connected to sustainability and wellness. Describe that to our audience. And are there examples for our audience?
Thanks, John. When we first started talking about diversity and inclusion and equity, it was in the makeup of the profession. As an architect, there were very few women, very few architects of color, really very few women architects of color, which is why Gabrielle is such an amazing role model. But then we started looking at how it would affect our design and how can we design to be more inclusive and to understand people in the spaces that we're designing for. It's not a one size fits all by any means. One example of this when we were ordering chairs for our new office, we did Herman Miller Aeron chairs, and they sent around a paper saying, what size do you want? Because they come in, multiple sizes, small, medium, large chairs. So people pick the one that I'm smaller, I'm shorter, I'm larger, whichever one they felt more comfortable in. And I think you could tell the difference until the tags came off of them. Mm-hmm. And then chairs started shuffling around and people started, leaving or hiring, and we didn't know which chairs were which chairs anymore. And it wasn't something that we ever thought about again. And as we're planning conference rooms and meeting rooms, we have 8 chairs lined up around the conference table. Sometimes they have arms on them. If you are a larger person or a short person or a pregnant woman, that might be the worst possible thing. And you don't want people to feel bad just because of a simple thing like a chair. So we're starting to look at how spaces and furniture and things in the space can be designed to really make people thrive more. Mikhail, when we were working on your office, it's a square plan. 2 sides of it are other buildings, so no windows hardly on those walls, but 2 sides are nice and bright and open. So we planned the office spaces so that the active, social, bright spaces were against the windows, and the more quiet, the mother's rooms, the quiet rooms, the yoga rooms were in the cooler, dimmer spaces. And we found that, sometimes people just need a minute. They need to get away. They need to just regroup. I expect that to be a big part of the conversation as we're planning on post-COVID-19, because people are not going to be the same coming back. People are not going to feel safe necessarily. So the spaces that we design and redesign and put them in, invite them to, need to be ones that keep that in mind and are supportive.
Mm-hmm. We're actually working with Perkins & Will on a post-occupancy study that will include the reoccupation of our base camp headquarters space, which we're trying to really use as a model to create best practices for maintenance is a huge one. People are wanting to talk a lot about what materials and services are we using, but the first thing that has to change is maintenance.
Right.
There's a lot of spaces have had very casual maintenance regimes, and that will definitely be the first thing to change. then you'll have to figure out, do you have the right equipment to clean all the surfaces, or maybe you need different surfaces if you're really never going to wet clean, you know, your
the carpet, yeah.
carpets, or then don't use them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the you actually will clean.
One of the other aspects of, I guess, diversity and inclusion is, you know, LEAD has always had a point for having a view out of a window. And the reason for that is that they say people are more productive, they get more done. A company's biggest costs go into the employee, not the building, right? We've all heard that since LEAD began. So if you think about someone who comes to work and doesn't fit in their chair, or can't reach the table, or is uncomfortable because it's too noisy or too bright, and, you know, or they're scared, how much of a company's value and profit is being wasted just because of that? I think it's just the next evolution of being mindful of people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I think my background is in biomimicry and biology, and diversity is key in all natural systems to resilience. If your system only has one way to do something and it gets disrupted, or for humans, one way to think about something, and background conditions change, you go and suffer and go extinct. If you're a species, you have to have diversity to have resilience. And that's really an important moment right now as we are disrupted.
Exactly.
Organizations that don't have diversity in how they think about challenges are going to be harder hit by this.
It's diversity of people, diversity of what we do and our spaces, and it all affects human wellness in many ways. Mikhail, you had touched on operations. That's a key aspect of sustainability and wellness in interiors. You're with a company that produces flooring, so I'm going to ask you that the question. It came up last week as well, and it's a reaction to this moment in time of the concern about germs and other health aspects. Will this moment push designers to potentially specify more hard surface floors compared to carpet? Why or why not? What do you say? What does Interface say related to that?
I mean, what I'll say, and I responded to a question on the Q&A on this as well, is that the first thing that we really need to change is maintenance regimes, as I just said. We have sanitizing regimes. We have a whole, you know, microbiology lab, one of the only ones in the flooring industry, so we know this topic very well. Mostly what we look at, as Paula alluded to, is preservatives, you know, things that are performance enhancing so that flooring doesn't break down. Right. But we also do know microbiology very well, and so we can recommend green chemistry treatments that are hydrogen peroxide based, so it breaks down into water and oxygen. It's about as green as you can get in terms of chemistry, but it's also on the EPA's list of stuff that actually does kill COVID-19. So it's a very potent sanitizing agent. It works for any of, whether it's hard surface or carpet. Like I said, if you just don't ever clean your carpet, maybe you shouldn't put in carpet. The challenge with carpet is that it hides soil. If your hard surface floor is dirty, the dirt is right there. You know you need to clean it. People get complacent about the carpet because it wonderfully filters out that stuff, hides it in the pile. And then you say, carpet's terrible, it's so dirty. It's because you didn't clean it.
So white carpet for everybody is what you're suggesting.
Well, I mean, that would certainly show the soil.
Right.
But really, it's, you know, you can use the same sanitizing treatments. We've put out, you know, a sanitizing protocol for any one of our products. You know, the Nora rubber is super popular in hospitals simply because you can kind of put any disinfectant on it and it still won't be damaged. Otherwise, you really need to pair, whether it's for flooring or any other surface, sanitizing has to be done with the right disinfectant. Hopefully it's green chemistry and non-toxic, but also something that won't bleach or ruin your finish. Okay, it's clean, but now it looks terrible. But there are, for both carpet and hard surface, there are great green chemistry options that can sanitize, but you have to put them in to your maintenance protocol.
Mikhail, I appreciate you addressing that. A little bit of the elephant in the room conversation here related to flooring. So I appreciate the we're all learning. We're all learning from this moment, which is really helpful too. You had also mentioned to me a really good tool for understanding embodied carbon. So I want to make sure that we mention that buildingtransparency.org, which is a free, useful tool for both interior designers and architects. Can you briefly say how that's tool?
So again, just one of these things that I hope and we've actually gotten a lot of firms to learn about the EC3, the Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator, EC3, Perkins and Will and others are sponsors. I think we're getting a lot of new sponsors because everyone realizes how cool this could be if this tool gets widely adopted. It essentially reads all the environmental product declarations for you and gives you these quick comparisons of, okay, your pick and ceiling tile, here's your high, medium, and low embodied carbon emission options. You know, could the low one work for your project? Well, why not pick that one? But it plugs into Revit and BIM 360 and all these tools people are already using. It's free, open source, really intended to try to make it become a standard part of design to consider embodied carbon, whether we're doing new buildings or, you know, ideally for embodied carbon if we're doing renovations, because that's the first consideration, you know, and again, might also be a way to reduce costs. Can we do a renovation rather than replacing the whole building, like we did with Perkins and Will at Base Camp? Took a pretty ugly building, skinned it, made it fabulous, but we really kept those key high embodied carbon structural pieces intact. And then I think ended up with the best of both worlds. JLL just did a case study on it, which we have available if people want to see it.
Even most of the materials that came out of that building ended up going to the Life Cycle Building Center in Atlanta or to other diversions. So,
Blaine, a question for you. I know that when we had talked separately, you had mentioned, say, a studio or a class at Minnesota that's looking at materials in some way, or you were asking them to look in a different way related to material choices, etc. Can you briefly describe that?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think the class you're referring to, I teach a sustainability class to graduate students on materials. And I have a couple of students right now that are working on a research project, and their paper's due tomorrow, on the intersection between antimicrobial properties in materials and embodied carbon in materials. And so they're looking specifically at countertops. But just to back up a little bit, I would just say this COVID-19 shift that we all experienced, I tried to open the door to students to take advantage of what we're all going through and to make their topics and their research relevant to what we're going through, because we've all been so distracted. And I've kind of felt like if we're not relating our work to what's going on to the extent that we can, right, to wrestle with it, to try to figure out how to respond, then my presumption is that the student passion wouldn't be there. You know, we'd be just continually distracted. And so that's something that we've tried to do in the class.
Good. And it's a difficult time for your graduating seniors in design and architecture. Any quick words of wisdom for those graduating and trying to enter the profession at this time?
Yeah, just in terms of the near term, it's a challenge. My recommendation is to diversify in terms of the industries you're looking at, in terms of the scales, the locations. Look at product design firms, look at federal work if you've only been looking at corporate work, for example, or other types of work, or certain firms, look elsewhere. So that's just kind of broad input. But on the upside, I'm trying to the extent possible, and it's hard, to get students excited about the possibilities that might unfold for them. And I think that we all face one of the biggest challenges, actually, in the commercial arena, if not broader arena, in terms of how to balance community and health. We all are wired to be together, maybe not 24/7, but to some extent, right? To have face-to-face interaction, like Paula was saying. to bounce ideas off each other, to be creative. But at the same time, we have to have some distance. But studies have shown the more distance we have from one another, our mental health goes down and we're susceptible to viruses and other things. Mm-hmm. So how do we as designers help to bring people together safely? Is a huge challenge and opportunity for us.
I think that's a great point to end on, trying to look forward to a positive future. That's really great. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Sonja, Paula, Blaine, and Mikhail, for being really great panelists today. Thank you to Interface for sponsoring this series. We'll be back here again next week, Thursday, 2:30 Eastern, for another collective design webinar from IIDA headquarters. A reminder that this is approved for one CEU from IDCEC for interior designers. More information's on your screen right now. Take a screenshot of that if you need to. Email ceu@iida.org if you want to be certain that you're getting your credit for watching this session. So, thank you again. Stay safe, everyone, and have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.